are you?
Good. Moving along. I did the CreativePro
Right?
conference a couple of weeks ago, which was super fun. And oh
Nice.
man, they sent me this pin that I've been meaning to take a picture of.
Let's get decked out. Okay.
Isn't that funny?
Right on.
But yeah, great group of folks over there. And it was fun
Okay.
just,
How'd that go? What was, I guess, give us a recap for those that weren't there or didn't get to listen in.
yeah, it's available on demand now on their website. And Joel
Okay.
also has a segment there. He was talking about storytelling. My segment was about Google Slides.
Uh
And
huh.
it's, which is a very funny thing for me to be speaking about because I don't like Google Slides. I think everybody knows that who knows me. It's just not my favorite. And but I was able to, take some time to really dig into it. And I have a pretty solid workflow that I use it with as far as like going in between PowerPoint and Google Slides if I'm working on larger projects. A lot of the stuff I do is only in Google Slides. And so then I did a lot of, how can you take advantage of the animation that Google Slides can offer, which is, limited compared to PowerPoint or Keynote, but there's some stuff there. So gave little tips and tricks on that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right on. We'll have to check that out. I also I've been working more on Google Slides lately as well, and one of the things like I've seen from other companies do that I'm starting to implement is using GIFs more creatively. So like using
Yes.
them to make an icon appear more alive, or even using them for like to make it appear that there's some sort of title transition, but it's not.
Hmm.
So it
Oh,
makes it
cool.
feel like it's kind of tricking things again. So
I like
definitely,
that.
since we're stuck using it, we got to start getting
Yeah.
creative.
Yeah. I also went through how to make your own GIFs in Photoshop, and not just rely on
Right.
Giphy or anything like that. But, you can get around it. It's just how much time you have.
Yeah, true. One trick I learned before we jump topics, so one trick I learned is if you have like you export a video of an animation or something, you bring it into Photoshop, and then you export a GIF from there, get you a lower file size and a much higher quality GIF
Oh, excellent. That's
than
a great
just
tip.
exporting straight to GIF some other way.
Yep. So
I'm
maybe
not the
doing your
biggest.
animation in PowerPoint or Keynote and then exporting it, or even like After Effects
Yeah, yeah,
and then
trying that
creating your
because
GIF. That's cool.
for some reason, every time I try to do GIFs without much knowledge, like I'd export it and do everything to get it a smaller file size, and then it'd just be like grainy and messed up. But this works
Hmm.
really well. So, tip.
Neat. I'll
Anyways,
try that.
aside from that, I know one thing that we touched on that we want to dive deeper on that I think is really valuable for the whole community of presentation design and what version control is all about is the career progression of a presentation designer, the career ladder, the career opportunities, where you start to where you end up, either if you want to stay in presentation design or how you can branch out to other fields because of presentation design. So I know this has been a lot on your mind lately. So, yeah, what thoughts did you have that we wanted to cover there?
I mean, there are a couple of things I think about there, and one is being the freelancer, having your own business where you're the principal and you are maybe hiring other people out to do work with you as well, or maybe maybe it's just you and you're handling all of the aspects of the business side of it as well. Um, I am a full-time person, and so that my thoughts there have a lot to do with what kind of company you're in, what the setup is, what division you're in, and also looking at the thing about corporate speak is like the IC levels and then moving into management and being able to build out a team and all of that stuff. So I'm fortunate to be working with product designers, and there's a set standard of how product designers move up to if they don't want to manage people, then you can move through the ranks and become, IC6, IC7, and then be like a
Mm-hmm.
principal designer. And I think that that's kind of the more of the path that I'm on. I really still like doing the work and not
Mm-hmm.
as much the people side of it. So that's kind of my
Okay.
focus right now. Yeah.
Nice.
How about you?
Yeah, I'm internal as well, and um, I've definitely been on both sides of it, on the IC and on the management side. I was probably more on the management side recently, but then with this role I'm at now, jumped back into just being the individual contributor full board. Um, in one part because we built a whole new creative team, and part of that is building the presentation team, the presentation aspect of it. So we needed someone to come in who can help do that and do the work and kind of do everything until we build stuff out. And the management side of it still comes in, and this goes once we start talking about career. Like, you could be a presentation designer, but what part of presentation design do you want to focus on? If you want to focus just on pitch decks, that's a very specific piece. If you want to focus on events and event production, like that's a lot of what I'm doing here. Even if you're an individual contributor, you still have to manage the vendors that you're going to work with, the contractors that are going to help you, because there's no single presentation designer doing an entire event by themselves. Or if they are, you probably don't see them anywhere because they're exhausted and dying in the corner of the bedroom somewhere. So you always need that help, and you need to be able to, be able to manage a lot of different people and different pieces to put that event together. And then if you're just building out your own team to work on internal work like sales decks and everything else that goes on internally, because everybody uses slides, so there's always a need for it, then it's really branching out, having someone work on enablement materials, slide libraries, so you don't have everyone coming to you for every little thing. They can actually go support themselves. Or you have someone that works directly just with exec requests that come in because they speak more to that level of work. There's just so many different variations and niches of it. But
Hmm.
it's all kind of choose your flavor.
Yeah, that's something I've done before too, is training of solution consultants who are like the technical salespeople. So they go in after the salespeople have kind of gotten the company interested, and then
Yeah.
they really hook them, right? So they have to know all of the products. Those people build their own decks, and I've
Mm-hmm.
given training to those teams before. I'm really big on internal training because I
Yeah.
feel like it makes everybody's job easier on the presentation design side if you're starting with a more elevated product to begin with, right? Um,
Yep.
but another thing I wanted to say is that when you had mentioned, this sparked in me, is the different avenues that you could go into. And my role now is actually a communication designer, which I feel is a bit different. I don't do events. I
Mm-hmm.
handle internal communications for a product team, and
Mm-hmm.
then there are external communications roles too. And part of what I do is I'll research what I'm giving a talk on, and then or what I'm making the deck for, and then do everything from writing it to creating the deck. And I also have a visual designer that I can work with and lean on in that sense. But it feels like a little bit more of an expanded role. And I've also known people who've gone into advertising, like Joel Simmons,
Yeah.
and people who've gone into animation after learning more about After Effects and that kind of thing. So
Right.
it's a good like springboard area of
It really
just
is.
jumping off from there.
It really is. It's like a creative melting pot where, depending on what niche you're in, or just how creative you're getting with it, you're gonna learn video design, you're gonna learn or video editing, you're gonna learn like the animations and the gifs and creative ways to put things together and that polish. You're gonna learn content. You're gonna definitely gonna learn the product that you're working on in the sales strategy, because all that content is right there. So there's so many different ways you can take that. And I think one of the big pieces that everyone should understand and realize if you are getting into this career is, because it's still kind of so small, in terms of, not every company has a presentation designer. Not every company has, if they have one, they have two. Not every company has this resource. Um, so if you do land that role somewhere, how you move up and how you evolve is really on your shoulders, and how you figure that out, how you navigate that, the value you bring to people you work with, because nobody else in the company you're in likely knows anything about a career ladder for a presentation designer, because there
Hmm.
isn't one, and they're not going to
Right.
spend the time to try and figure it out for you. So you can never wait on someone else for that opportunity. And like you said, you're in on the product side of things. I'm on the marketing side of things. In the past, I was on the sales side of things. So all these different organizations have hired presentation designers. So I think that in itself shows that really we can work across the company. So it's not likely that that role you get is a company wide role, but once you get in that role, you can really evangelize that yourself, make those connections, because everyone in every org needs the work you're doing. And the more you can kind of expose yourself and put yourself out there and network with folks, you're really kind of creating your own opportunities. And this is one of the only roles where, at least creatively, where I've seen that happen so often.
Right. It's so new, right? There's just
Mm-hmm.
not that, it's like there are dozens of us. There's not that many people who
Yeah.
are doing this. And so I think it's definitely on us who are in the field now to kind of lay that foundation for the future, because doing the great work and showing the value is what's going to make these companies realize, oh, this is a resource that we have to put money towards. And then it's kind of on you to look at like what path have other creatives taken within that company. Is there a chief creative officer? Is there, it's like, what's the highest and how far can we dream? So
Yeah.
and then just applying that to our lane. So
Yeah, and there's also the case for um, just being the specialist. Like maybe you don't
mhm.
you don't want to go into those roles. You don't want to take on the different responsibilities that those create. Because if you start your career as a creative, and then let's say you want to work up to creative director. Me, for example, just use my personality type. I've been on the in the corporate world for a while, and I used to dream to be a creative director at some point. And the more I learn about what a creative director is, the less I actually want to be a creative director.
Right,
Because
right.
so much of it is you're really just another exec that has to work with everyone else, and you really become less creative, but just have to work more on strategy and planning and budgets and all that type of stuff, which to me is isn't fun or exciting. So like I kind of shy away from all the traditional creative titles. I don't want to work on that. So I want to focus on specializing on what it is I do. And now how can I create some sort of offering that everybody wants to be a part of, and then use that to bring in new designers and maybe create our own path and our own career ladder. And that's something I think maybe in 5 years, hopefully that is something that exists and we can look at and we can all reference.
So this is a book I wanted to recommend, Orbiting the Giant Hairball. Have you read this?
No, sounds
It's
interesting.
really great. It's all about staying creative in the corporate world and how to, it
Nice.
says right here, slip the bonds of corporate normalcy. And it's also just a super fun book. It's just like really well illustrated and little doodles in the lines and things like that. So I
Totally for
recommend it.
creatives.
Gordon McKenzie, he was a corporate person at Hallmark.
Okay.
So, and got to just sit and think about fun things. So I think I recommend that. Yeah.
I'll check that out. What's the one lesson that comes to mind that you recall from
Uh,
that book?
hmm. I think it's about originality and
Hmm.
also knowing what the rules are and then breaking them and
Yeah.
kind of being outside of the lanes, but also you're within this ecosystem of corporateness, and how can you
Hmm.
survive and still keep that thing that we all have who are creative visual
Hmm.
people. So yeah, I like it.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to bring up too is bringing it back to if I'm speaking to a young designer about you get into a role where you're really working heavily on presentations. You want to become that presentation designer. You're really interested in that, and you work towards that. Sorry if you hear my kids in the
It's
background
okay.
too, whining and complaining.
we're all good.
um, so one part of it is uh, being creative, like we said, with the type of work we can do. So, and this is now I'm speaking just the wide gamut, not just at full time gigs, but freelance, anything. Um, my wife actually just started teaching at this kind of K-12 charter school. And as she's going through the materials, I'm realizing they're actually teaching the entire curriculum through Google Slides. And most of these Google Slides and these lessons plans are terrible. They're horrendous. They're not having anybody work on them. They're just teachers who have no design background working on these. And I'm looking at one of the slides that they're using to teach kids with, and these are, third graders, and it's taking me like 10 minutes to understand what's going on this slide. So how are we going to expect a third grader to understand anything that's going on there? They're not
Yeah,
going to take the time to read it and understand it. They're not at that level of, understanding of content. So it's like, if you want to be creative and have fun with what you do as a presentation designer, you can approach a teacher or someone at school and just ask them about, hey, what do you teach with? Can I see an example of what you have? And then you work something up, you give them an option and be like, hey, do you think this is better? Is this easier to understand? Everyone's going to say yes, because nobody has that help. And then
right.
that goes to my second point of the best thing you can do as a presentation designer is like really serve people and help someone. So whoever you're working with at the time, really understand their problem and understand what they need and help them get to where they want to go. And they'll never forget you. They'll move
Hmm.
off to another company, they'll move somewhere else. They'll have their own network and they're going to plug you into it. And then your network's just going to multiply everywhere you go, because there's no presentation designers out there. And if you did good for them, they trust you. And are they going to want to go and search and find presentation designers that can do what they want and are talented? No, nobody wants to take the time to do any of that because everybody's busy. So those are the two things: be creative and where you can spot problems to fix. And then the second thing is just help the person in front of you. And then in 5 years, you'll be successful and have no problems.
I completely agree, because really our job is not to make pretty slides. Our job is to help our speaker get their message out in the best and most succinct way that's easily digestible, right? Like, I
Right.
don't like, yeah, third graders looking at a slide that has so many things on it. All these teachers need are guidelines, one idea per slide, not so many
Yeah.
words. Speak to it. It's supporting you, it's not taking your
Hmm.
place, right? So, yeah, I love that idea.
Teachers are presenters, right? They're up on a stage with an audience and some
Right.
slides. They need some structure. They need something to
It,
figure out. So whoever's listening, there's an
yeah,
opportunity.
it gets more obvious, I think, the higher you go as far as the grade level, because college teachers, college professors need to be entertaining, and they can't
Right.
just sit up there and be boring for an hour. They have to be entertaining and give good
Yeah.
information, and or
Yeah.
else no one's going to take their class and they don't get a job. So,
Exactly. Like that's every time I talk through these ideas, I get reignited again because of all the work that's still not done. There's so
right,
much
I
stuff
agree.
that we can work on. And what was I? Oh, there's one point you made about we're not just here to make pretty slides. And I think that's a really good point to touch on, because so many creatives coming up, that's one of their foundations is everything I do needs to look pretty. Like, it needs to be done well, pixel perfect, have a grid, alignment, everything, which are all valid things to make you a very polished designer and polished creative. But with presentations, it's different. It's not that, because depending on what type of deck you're working on, it's going to be, you don't really lay it out like a book where you have a grid and there's maybe like four layout types, and you just work through the content and you create this whole document. Oftentimes there might be 30 different layout types within a presentation you're working on, depending on what the content is, how that has to flow. If you're going from three icons with some content to a statement slide to a case study to something else, all these pieces live in one deck, and you're rarely going to be able to solve all that with one strict rigid grid. So you have to learn how to kind of design in this kind of flow state of seeing how things, sometimes they just make sense to be this way, but there's not a literal grid it aligns to or anything. And that's kind of a muscle you have to build as a presentation designer, and break free of some of those rules, as you mentioned, that you're used to growing up with as you're learning design, and kind of break that and be like,
Mhm.
okay, well, what makes sense for this deliverable? And it's a little bit different. And I think that's potentially a learning curve for some folks coming from a traditional creative background.
Definitely. I started out as a photography major, and my teachers were all trained with Ansel Adams and Edward Weston, and we learned the zone system, and that was such a technical thing. And my teacher said, the thing about the zone system is you learn this, and then you forget it. You just know it already. It's just part of who you are,
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying there. It's like it's an eye, it's an instinct that you develop.
Yeah. Definitely. Um, so then, in terms of kind of the career progression on where that is today, I think there's a few different points we could touch on. One of them is how that sets us up for other roles. So using, as you said, presentation design as this launch pad, and that's taken, Joel, who we talk to and work with all the time, just worked on a Super Bowl commercial for Workday. So going from presentation design to a Super Bowl commercial, how do you connect those two? And like nobody knows how that would be even possible. And that's, I think, surprising to all of us. Like it's just a feather in the cap, I'm sure, for him and for presentation designers as a whole, on how we're able to take the skills from this role and attach it to something else. Um, so like even just speaking on what those skills are that translate everywhere, like how does that translate to the roles you're seeing in your job that are
Well,
outside
I
of
mean,
presentations?
as far as the Super Bowl commercial, I think it's what's clear to me there is that Joel has always been great about the story, right? And he's been
Mm-hmm.
on top of it with his speakers. He would work with his speakers to tease out what the storyline was that they were going to make. And being a presentation designer, you're not just taking notes and then doing whatever they want you to do. It's an active collaboration as far as I'm concerned, right? So
Mm-hmm.
your speaker may not know what will really hit the audience the hardest, but that's where your experience comes in. So I think for Joel, it was how do we tell this workday story in an eye-catching 30-second spot or
Right.
whatever, 60-second spot. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was
And
super fun
that's,
to watch.
it was like, it was on point. And we're like, how come nobody created this commercial before? It makes total sense. For anybody who hasn't seen it, it's, I forgot the name of it, but it's all about how we all call each other rock stars. And then he has, you have to go watch it. So to what you're saying about, working with speakers and really understanding their content and being able to kind of infuse our ideas and our creative into what is presented up on stage. Another big part of that is we often have to understand the audience and understand a live audience and see how they react and have those experiences of what content worked, what didn't, why it didn't work. So we're always involved with that type of stuff. And I think that ties directly into putting together a commercial or understanding your audience and how this message translates between those two different bridges. But yeah, so taking presentation design, going to, the Super Bowl commercial route that we can all take, obviously, or going elsewhere with it where you can take the skills you have and you can really work on anything. You can go back into the traditional design roles that you know of and become, an art director and work your way up that way. Because one of the biggest pieces that I think, or one of the biggest muscles we have, is being able to present and communicate ideas is massive. It has nothing to do with just the deliverable you produce. And I'm sure this is a big part of, why Joel's where he's at, is because if you take that Super Bowl commercial as an example, there's a lot of work that goes into getting to that point. All the process and the strategy and the meetings and the brainstorming. There's one piece that's really important with all of that, and that's how you present these ideas, how you communicate them, how you pitch them to the execs to get them bought in. And I guarantee you, Joel was a big part of all of those in some aspect, because those are all heavily influenced by presentation design and communicating, and how you would pitch an idea to an exec different than you would pitch an idea to a creative that's on your team. You have to frame these things differently. And we got to
It
peek
is
for
so
back there.
true. Yeah,
Yeah.
because this is a skill that everybody uses throughout their whole career, right? The
Mm-hmm.
other thing I was going to say is product design. I know a lot of people who've gone from doing presentation design jobs with me to eventually they're working in product. And the thing about product design is that you have to understand what your product is meant to do. You have to have
Mm-hmm.
empathy for your user, and you have to create that story of, okay, here's this person, here's their problem, here's the product we want to create to solve that problem for them. And then you have to
Mhm.
present that, right? So it's always about, comes back to presenting that idea and getting it out there. So I even, I work with fifth graders on, it's called an
Yeah.
exit criteria presentation at their school, where they give a
Okay.
20-minute presentation to a panel, and it's on their entire time at this school that my kids go to. Um, it's pretty amazing that these fifth grade, I couldn't give a speech in fifth
Yeah.
grade to a panel, and that it's 20 minutes long, but I sit there and I coach them and work with them on skills that they will use for the rest of their career.
Yeah. That's a big one. Like, especially going back to talking about, education and curriculum. Um, I know it's always a big thing. You when you're growing up and you're in school, you go up to the front of the class, you have to speak, and I think all that education stops at, you know, do public speaking or put yourself in positions for public speaking, just to kind of conquer that fear for the youth. But they never teach them, skills and structure of how to actually go up there and do well and overcome that fear. They just say, here, go up there and read this, or go up there and present. And that's it. There's never any other information on how you can actually prepare yourself to go up there and not just be frightened and freeze up, and actually, say insightful information and keep people engaged. And that level of content is really lives with us in terms of how we can formalize it and create it and do what you're doing with fifth graders. And that's another piece. If we're talking career and career opportunities, like, be creative, think about what you can do and what you can solve for people, because these are problems out there. um, and something else I wanted to cover on, it might be kind of a, switching gears a little bit. There's so many people I've spoken to who are not presentation designers but are interested in switching into the career. So we're talking about people that are well on in their careers. They're not, new up and coming young people trying to get a career off the ground. I've spoken to people in sales. I've spoken to people who are executive assistants, and all of them have to create decks daily and do it all the time. And sometimes there's going to be people that are more inherently creative and actually do really well doing that in those roles. And if they're doing well in those, people, their own peers are going to ask them to help with their decks and their work. So imagine if you're an executive assistant and you're creating decks for whoever it is you're supporting. Then next thing you know, another executive assistant, a project manager, someone else is going to them to get design work to help them with their slides. Next thing you know, they're kind of doing two jobs. And they often don't know that they could jump into presentation design. So it's like, we'll put together some of these samples, create these pieces, and then just put yourself out there and try and get some freelance roles. And then you can switch gears, because one, you're an executive assistant, you know how to speak to execs, you already know the lingo, and you know the type of content that goes into slides. So then there's a bridge there. And then if we're talking
So true.
about, the other one that I mentioned was it executive assistant? Oh, someone in sales. So
Sales.
that piece of it, in a sales process, you constantly have to communicate with your potential buyer, and kind of, you put together all your materials of what the customer's pain is, what they need to solve, where they're at in their business, their specific problems they're trying to solve with your product. And you have to present that back to them to get them bought in on it. And so often, if you go to any company and you just ask them to see their sales decks, they all look a mess. They look terrible. They look like the third grader curriculum decks I was talking about. And you put that in front of someone who you're asking, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars from. They have no time to sit there and listen to you. So if you put a slide in front of them that takes them 10 minutes to understand what's going on, or they need you to explain it to them, you're probably not going to do that well if they're not already interested in buying the product in the first place. So there's so many needs on all these different angles, and people in those positions are presentation designers if they really buy in and invest in it. And then there's so many ways to get into this career, is kind of what I'm getting at. It's kind of like a Swiss cheese box we're all in, where everybody can come in from every different angle and find their way in.
Yep. And
So
then
that's
blaze your own
finding their way
trail.
in. And then, and then blazing your own trail. Like, where does that take us? That's definitely something to think about.